Hundreds of sub-postmasters wrongfully convicted as part of the Horizon IT scandal are finally set to have their names cleared. The government's introduced a new bill that is set to exonerate the majority of victims in England and Wales prosecuted between 1996 and 2018. But some of those affected say they are still to be convinced that progress will be made, and critics are disappointed the legislation does not apply to Scotland. So is this really what justice looks like? Joining me now is Paul Scully, Conservative MP and former Postal Affairs Minister, and sub-postmaster and victim of the scandal, Christopher Head. Very good evening to both of you. Thanks for joining us. Christopher, you were one of the youngest people affected by this horrible situation, and you were convicted in one way, shape or form, I believe. Is this going to affect you, or if it's not going to affect you, what's your situation?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't actually convicted. I went through a criminal investigation for 6 months, twice interviewed under caution in my home search. So I wasn't actually convicted. Then I went through a civil proceedings with the post office. Right. But obviously I've campaigned for a long time on this issue. And it's important that, we got this legislation forward in order to begin the process of overturning these convictions that have been outstanding for some people for more than 2 decades. And right. So that they can obviously eventually access the compensation that they rightly deserve.
Yeah, because, I mean, we've all spoken on TalkTV to various different colleagues, former colleagues of yours, who still have not received any kind of compensation whatsoever. We know some of them did receive compensation, but a lot of it was taken away by the lawyers. I mean, are most of the people affected by this then people who were actually convicted?
Yeah, I mean, I said once the convictions are actually overturned, they can access, certain levels of compensation in terms of interim payment of 163,000, and then they can either take £600,000 and walk away, or they can put a fully detailed assessment forward. The problem is, as you know, what people have actually been through in terms of losing their homes, their businesses, some of them, their family members, and all the reputational damage. Sometimes, the £600,000 will not go far enough for them people, and they need to go through a much more complex route to prove what them losses actually were. So it's not a quick and easy process.
No, of course not. Paul Scully, let me come to you. I mean, as you heard there from Christopher, it's a welcome move in the right direction, but it's a very messy business, this, isn't it? It's going to take a very long time to get to all of the people who have been affected in so many different ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been either tweeting Christopher. We met the other day for the first time in person. He's been amazing at not just trying to tackle his own situation, but campaigning for so many others and helping them through that process, because it has been quite complicated for them in terms of the application forms they've had to fill in and these kind of things. And that's part of the sort of due process that that government has to do, I suppose, in some ways when it's spending taxpayers' money. Whereas clearly, as we can see with what's playing out in front of us, actually, what Christopher and other people need is life-changing money in a hurry to actually bring their lives back to some sort of normality. For the people that are convicted, whereas we can tackle the people that have just lost out financially, I say just in inverted commas, we can tackle the 555 that lost out because so much of their compensation went to the lawyers. The 555, they're the people that went into the group litigation order, the court case that was in that drama series. But what we aren't able to do yet is compensate the people with live convictions, because you're not allowed to compensate convicted criminals, as they still are seen in the eyes of the law. That's why we've got to get this legislation through, so we can get them money as soon as possible too.
Yes, and life-changing money is absolutely what they do require. However, Paul, I would ask you this. Who's paying for that? Because there are people in this country who think it shouldn't be the taxpayer. It should perhaps be the people that put the systems in the first place, and the people who continually victimise those who had done nothing wrong, but were being told that they were cheats and liars and thieves.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, clearly the taxpayer has to underwrite it, so we all have to underwrite it to make sure that we can get the money out of the door, but it can't be left at that, as you rightly say. And I think Duncan Baker, my colleague, the North Norfolk MP, asked in the chamber today, the current Postal Affairs Minister, Kevin Hollinrake, exactly that question. What's going to happen with Fujitsu, for example, who provided the Horizon software and said it's absolutely impenetrable, there is no back door. So they're on the hook for this. They've acknowledged the fact that they have played a massive part in that. Clearly, the post office, problem with the post office, it is publicly owned. And what we want to do is, whatever you think about the reputation of the post office, it still has more branches than banks and building societies put together. And it still offers a massive service to people around this country. So we've got to give it a future as well. So yes, taxpayers are underwriting it, but we've got to go further and make sure that those people who are responsible for it do end up paying.
Yeah, good. Christopher, let me just come back to you. In your case then, when you were prosecuted through the civil process, the civil courts, what does that mean for you? How has that affected your life, and how can you get rid of that sort of, alleged shame, I suppose?
Yeah, I mean, when it was ongoing for a long period, like I said, the criminal investigation lasted 6 months, which they dropped without any reason, and then they went down the civil route, and that was in a locked-in battle that lasted almost 2.5 years. And it only became to an end because the group litigation order was granted, and they agreed to put things on a stay, and it was only formally dropped in 2020. So it went on for almost 5 years hanging over my head, which just meant that you couldn't move on from anything. Like, I've explained to, when I went into mediation just over a week ago, I was explaining to the lawyers there, saying that, even when you were going for jobs afterwards, you had two options. You either had to tell them why your contract ended with the post office, which, if you turn around and say, well, it was terminated because of contract theft and fraud allegations, then obviously they're not going to give you a job. And if you then don't tell the truth to them and they find out, oh, well, you've withheld that from them, that doesn't go down very well either. So you're kind of trapped, and you just haven't been able to rebuild. You couldn't get any type of work. I moved abroad for a period of time in order to try and mitigate my losses into a lowly paid job abroad. And then when I returned back to the UK again, I struggled again for that same problem with either gaps on my CV or trying to explain why that original contract came to a close.
Right.
So it's had a never-ending problem with my life, and also it's affected my family as well, because they were subject to small talk and gossip in the local area that we lived in all our lives. So it's impacted all of us.
Yes. And one of the things we don't hear about much from the victims in this case is it must have affected things like your credit rating, which makes it, in this day and age, almost impossible to do anything.
Yeah, I mean, every part of it. So whether it's your reputation, whether it's losing your business, whether it's losing your future career, and all of them things, like you say, you have all of these smaller add-on things that really people don't talk about. I mean, especially anybody that has been declared bankrupt through it, whether that's directly caused by the post office or as an indirect effect of the post office. All of these things need put right, because you can give them compensation, but if their credit rating isn't also restored along with it, then like you say, there's not a lot they can do with it. They wouldn't be able to go out there and buy a house or get a mortgage or anything like that, even with the compensation that they have. So there's so many little aspects of this that need to be put up right, and that's why this becomes so complicated, with so many different schemes, so many people affected in many different ways. And then you said all of these add-on things as well.
Exactly right. Paul, I mean, Christopher makes a good point there, doesn't he? Because credit rating, I know it might sound trivial compared to all the other things that happen to these people, but, anyone who's had problems with their own credit knows it's a real nightmare. You can't do anything. You can't get a credit card. You can't get a bank account. You can't get a mortgage. You can't buy a car. You can't lease a car. You can't rent a car. You can't do anything. So, I mean, there has to be presumably similarly backup, not necessarily legislation, but clear orders that all of these people must be restored to sort of full British citizenship, if you like.
Absolutely. Look, when I use the word compensation, I'm sort of using it in shorthand, because actually what these people need, Christopher and the others need, is some sense of restoration. It's bringing them back, as you say, as close to where they would have been. It's never going to be perfect. You're not going to be able to do that in reality. That's why I keep talking about life-changing money, because that's the biggest lever that we have, the biggest ability to control this through Treasury. But you're absolutely right. It is these seemingly small things to us that all rack up to make their lives so much more complicated. So the more we can do around that, we can't do it soon enough, frankly.
No, exactly right. Paul Scully, thank you very much indeed. And Christopher, good luck with it. We'll keep in touch, I'm sure. We'll talk to you again. Christopher Head, again, still trying to get something out of the government, which, as I say, should not be us that's paying it. We'll find out more about that as we go forward, but at least a step in the right direction, it would appear, for so many of the victims whose lives were completely ruined and completely are still being ruined, just for the sake of some computer company and Fujitsu who got it massively, massively wrong.